Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Arthur Schwartz, who is a lawyer for the Pacifica Radio Network. So, Arthur, I know a lot of people don't know about Pacifica. So, can you give us an overview of exactly what Pacifica is, what areas of the country it reaches, and, basically, it's kind of like NPR, right?
Um, Kind of, but not exact.
Okay.
Pacifica, actually the name of it is the Pacifica Foundation. It is a network of radio stations. The Pacifica Foundation was formed, I think, around 1947,
Okay.
uh, and it originally had stations in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And over the years, it acquired a station in Houston, and then it got a station in Washington, D.C. And then in 1960, somebody that owned a station in New York called WBAI basically gave the station to Pacifica. So Pacifica has five major radio stations that it operates in those five cities: New York, Washington, Houston, Los Angeles, and the Bay Area. It also has about 210 affiliated stations.
Mm-hmm.
So by affiliated means that they're they're allowed to they operate on their own. Pacifica doesn't have any. Pacifica donates some money to their functioning, but they basically raise and govern themselves, and um, but they're allowed to take content from any Pacifica station that is broadcasting. So, for example, I have a show on WBAI in New York. If somebody is interested in that show, they can broadcast it on uh, any of the affiliates uh, can broadcast it, and they pay a small amount of money for that. So the reality is that Pacifica is everywhere. Its principal stations are in every major metropolitan area except Chicago, and there are people that want to start a station in Chicago or acquire a station in Chicago, and it's also online. You know, Pacifica. Each of the stations has a spot like WBAI has WBAI.org, and shows are can be listened to anywhere in the country. And I know that they're trying to build a YouTube network and other platforms because
Wow.
how how listening radio listening is in some ways a thing of the past. There's still a lot of people that listen to the radio. You know, talk radio shows are still a major force in American culture, and particularly on the right. So we try to counter it on the left. So now, what's different between Pacifica and NPR is that NPR is wholly funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting uh, and some corporate donations. WBAI and the Pacifica Foundation are is is almost 100%. At this point, it is 100% financed by listener donations.
Mm-hmm.
So they raise about $12 million a year to run the five stations, uh, totally based on listener donations. And sometimes people leave money in their wills. I just finished negotiating one. Somebody left $200,000 to WBI. It was really nice in his will, and they used to receive money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and I think there was some problems with their accounting that have now been corrected, and I'm hoping that in the next round of giving that the CPB gives money again uh, to Pacifica.
Now, I broadcast out of Albany, New York, WCAA. And Uh, WCAA is a community station. It's a low power FM station with only 100 watts. I say only, I shouldn't say only because of streaming. It's remarkable. But would you say the majority of um, members that are on the Pacifica Network are community radio stations, low power FM stations?
Right. So the affiliates are low power stations, mostly. The main stations, like the station in Los Angeles, KPFK, has the most powerful signal of any radio station in Los Angeles. The station in New York, WBAI, has one of the most powerful uh, signals, and it's at 99.5 FM, way in the right in the middle of the FM dial. There have been offers to buy the signal for $50 million.
Mm-hmm.
So those stations, because they go back so far, are in very critical places, and they're very strong signals. So the WBAI can be heard, 90 miles from New York City, or more, depending on the basically.
Mm-hmm.
And KPFK it's similar. It's heard all over the Los Angeles metropolitan area. Same with KPFA in the Bay Area. Very powerful signal, can be heard in San Francisco, Oakland, and in the outlying, in Berkeley. Well, they actually broadcast from Berkeley, um, and so these are major radio stations. These are not like community radio stations, and they
Okay.
are governed by the FCC
Mm-hmm.
because of the strength of their signals, have to comport with FCC requirements, which are I think far more complex than what community radio stations have to do.
But okay, so WBAI and you named a couple in California. If I did something in Albany, it was broadcast in Albany and it went out over the Pacifica Network, then it could be picked up by WBAI and the other stations you mentioned in California. So the opportunity to be heard, with lots and lots of people is pretty good then, right?
Right. So and it is plausible, especially, it's interesting. COVID has changed the way we all broadcast. I When I started my show in 2017, I went into the studio every week
Mm-hmm.
uh, to do a show. And if I had a guest who wasn't in the studio, they would call in, and I would interview them, on the phone.
Right.
Then COVID hit, and all the stations experimented with various forms of broadcast where the even the engineers weren't coming in for a while. The station was being totally run remotely, and people experimented with many different formats. And now I do my show on Zoom, just like you do your show.
Right.
The one difference is I do it. Some people tape their shows. Some people, like I do my show live, which is harrowing. It's I gotta tell you, you're sitting there and you hope is the guest going to show up? Is
Mm-hmm.
the clip you're going to play accurately? Is the person going to avoid using, when you're on an FCC station, are they going to use one of the 7 banned words
Mm-hmm.
that you can't say on the radio? And But we do it remote. I do it now on Zoom. There were several other formats. So now somebody like you could do a show on WBAI from Albany, or you could, if you do a good show, you could send a clip, a copy of it to the program director and say, "Hey, I think this is a wonderful program. I think that I'd love it for you to play it on BAI," and they would do that. And the same goes the other way. I know that I did this astounding interview with Eric Adams, who's the mayor of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was actually off the air for about a year because I ran for New York City Council, and I couldn't be on the air and be a candidate at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But I did a podcast while I was out, and one of the people that did the podcast with was Eric Adams,
Mhm.
and it was an astoundingly. It was before the campaign really heated up, and it was an interview that at the end you wanted to cry when you heard his life story. It was really a fascinating story. And then when I came back, we fit it into an hour on my show. And I didn't win, so I got to go back on the air. I could have gone back on the air either way, but I went back on the air, and when one of the shows we played my clip, my not clip, my interview with Eric Adams, and I what somebody donated $5,000 at the end of the show because they said
Wow.
it was so moving to have that kind of a discussion with Eric about his childhood and his mother and his arrest when he was a teenager and his his academic issues and where he was really his work as a cop and being you know feeling like he would standing up for people who were being shot by the police during like Eleanor Bumpers and Abner Louima in New York City. um, Stuff that the press wasn't playing or
Mhm.
making noise about. uh, so somebody could submit from one of our affiliates a program, and the affiliates could pick up a program, and they do pick up some of the programs that Pacifica does. We've also we had one major success story. um, 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 we've had shows that have spun off into being their own um, their own programs and becoming syndicated. That happens every once in a while. Also, if the listenership is big enough. One of the things that we get to do in the stations is we track our Arbitron and Nielsen ratings, because you want to know if a show is being listened to. The program directors in every station work really hard to have uh, broadcasters who people are interested in and who develop a following and who have guests and issues that they talk about that or they play music. Some of our shows, some of our programs are music programs,
Mhm.
or um, uh, I'm not sure we do any theatrical readings, but I think they're either interview shows or music, and some of the music shows are fantastic, and you get to listen to music without commercials, right?
Mhm.
No commercials. There is a pitch, several times during a show.
Mhm.
So we track the shows on Arbitron and Nielsen, and the program directors try to, like I know now in WBAI, there's the 5 to 7 o'clock is mostly newsy type stuff that people like to listen to when they're driving home
Mhm.
from from work. And then there's Saturday morning is a certain kind of there's some home morning news uh, segment, and the they work really hard at making sure that this listenership, because you can't, particularly when anybody wants to do that anyway, but if you're surviving on contributions and donations, the number of people who are listening is going to be directly connected to the amount of money that you raise. And if nobody's listening, you're not going to raise much money.
Well, I've been doing interviews on Zoom, and then I put it on my YouTube channel. I've been doing interviews with Scott Ritter, who was the retired weapons inspector, and he made a name for himself back in the early 2000s when he said there were no WMDs. And people remember him, and I've been doing great interviews with him. And when I put it up on YouTube, I get thousands and thousands of views. So I'm thinking if I could do that and then combine it with on the Pacifica Network, that would be really powerful.
Well, I think that if you should contact, I'll give you the, or, I'll tell you how to contact program director in New York or the national leadership doesn't tell stations what they should broadcast.
Right.
Um, we're more so now I'm the general counsel of the national network. So I involve myself in governance issues of a Pacifica is a 501(c)(3) corporation.
Mhm.
And like any organization on the left, it has massive debates on how it should run. And people fight with each other and people have different ideas. And since it's a corporation, it's subject to the California corporation is we have litigation over usually between somebody makes a bylaw proposal and we have to have it's the other thing about Pacifica that's fascinating is that hold on a second. It is a it's a membership corporation. So if you donate $25 or more, you become a member of your radio station. And the radio station has elections 2 out of every 3 years for a local station board, they call it. And those local station board members elect members of a national board. There are 22 members on the national board, 4 from each of the local stations, the big stations, and 2 from the affiliates. So it's governed democratically, and there are differences of opinion about how the network should run. And anytime there's a proposal to change something structurally, there is a national vote. And in the last 3 years, we've had 2 national votes on modifications of the bylaws. And if, believe it or not, 25% of the members participate, which is better than public elections. And people, I don't even think, people donate money. They don't really expect to become members, to have a voice in the governance of an organization. I know I donate to NOW and the ACLU and whatever, and I get a card that says I'm a card carrying member of the ACLU, right?
Mhm.
But I don't really get to vote on changes in structure of the ACLU. But in Pacifica, you do, and people are really interested, and we have these incredible debates and emails and mailings and postcards and discussions on the air and postings online. And I think sometimes people in the organization take it for granted about how amazing that is, that anybody's even interested. Um, in public elections, if you had an election on changing the state constitution, you and I talked about this in another show. If you just had that on the ballot, 5% of the people, 5% of voters would turn out, 10% maybe. Right? We don't even in governor elections, we're lucky if we get between 20 and 25. In most local elections, we get 15%. And here it is, a foundation which has members. All you have to do is have given $25. And people consider it of such value that 25% of our donors will vote in an election. And we have contested elections for local station board. And there'll be 3 candidates for each slot. And there are very different visions of how the stations should run, and people have very developed approaches to it. So it's not only is it an astounding institution because it is a totally listener supported entity, but also because it's totally run by its members. It's not run by some beneficent board afar. It's run by a board, and there are limits to how long you can serve. I know my first 2 years as general counsel, I worked with a board. It was a tough period. It was right as COVID started. We took Pacifica through the 2 years of COVID, which were hard because donations were down. And we got the maximum amount of government grants, which thank goodness made up for the money we lost in donations. And And then come January 1st of this year, all of a sudden, three-quarters of the board are new people because people timed out on their how long they could serve, and there was all these new people, and I got to know everybody's name. We meet on Zoom, so I get to see everyone's faces. And people are coming from all over the country. And it's a whole new group of people who are now learning, the fundamentals of how the organization runs and making important decisions. And that's a very unique thing about Pacifica, which I think most listeners don't even think about when they're listening to the radio station. The other thing is that Pacifica, like your show, right? Pacifica, uh, people call it free speech radio. People can talk about things on the radio. They're not worried that they're going to offend a commercial sponsor. They're
Right.
not worried that they're going to offend someone who is a underwriter, right? Like entities like NPR have underwriters. You will hear every once in a while that, this programming is underwritten by Archer Daniels
Right.
Midland. Well, Archer Daniels Midland is one of the major agribusiness companies in the United States. So
Right.
maybe they think twice about having a show attacking agribusiness. Um, there's no underwriters. Uh, and the only ones we can offend are our members. But the members are members because they like what we say. And so what you wind up having are people expressing, you views that you don't hear in too many other places because it's not mainstream for the most part. Uh, I mean, I make a joke. My show I was the first time I was on WBAI, I was on as a guest, and it was when I was Bernie Sanders' lawyer in 2016. And and then I got offered a show by the program director because people liked what I said when I was on the air. And the I made a joke that as a Bernie crowd, I was the right winger at WBAI, right? I, that I had on people who were running for office and people who were in office, and uh, but I developed a following, and it sort of started influencing the programming because there was an audience to listen to, progressive people who were running, and I don't limit myself to the Democratic Party or but you know, but the voices you hear are often not you will not hear them anywhere else until they become super important. And then even there, I think people will say stuff on WBAI that they don't say elsewhere. In WBAI, I think there's a famous case. It was probably the foremost uh, case about free speech on the radio that went to the Supreme Court of the United States. It's called the WBAI versus FCC. And it was a case where George Carlin did a show on WBAI in the 1960s, and he cursed a lot, right? He did one of his routines. You cannot find a George Carlin routine. There's a very funny one out there about abortion, about right to life that maybe you could play it on your show. I can't play it on mine, where he talks about how right to lifers care about the life in the womb, but once you're born, forget about it. No interest, right? They don't care about childcare. They don't care about health care. They don't care about the mother's health. They don't care about schools, education. Just when you're in the womb, they care about you. So George Carlin did this thing, and he said these 7 words, which I'm not going to say on your show because I don't know if you're allowed. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court about whether they were 1960s protected by free speech, and we lost. We lost, and the Supreme Court said that the FCC could ban the F word, the S word, uh, and others of that ilk. Words these days that you hear in lyrics in a lot of rap songs.
Right.
But when I play if I play a rap song on my show, I have to screen it ahead of time and do a bleep. When someone says, F and B, I can't say either of those words. It's not allowed on.
Wow.
It can play. What's funny is it can play on. So now we have Sirius XM,
Mm-hmm.
satellite radio. That's not governed by the FCC. So people can play whatever they want there. But WBAI sort of became the foremost fighter for free speech. And it's an important, it still stands for that, everywhere. We have to work within bounds. We're not also not allowed to favor candidates. We're 501(c)(3). We can't tell people to support legislation. We have to give equal time to people, which means that if I invite the Democrat, I have to invite the Republican. Most Republicans will tell me to go jump in a lake, but I do. I make sure I'm covering my A, and I send them an invitation, and they go, "Why would I waste my time being on WBAI?" But I have to invite. If there's a Democratic primary, I try to invite most of the major candidates to come and sit and talk with me. And we have to, you're not allowed to tell people. We had a big, when Trump was president, it was really hard because you could say Trump is a jerk. That was okay. But if you said, I hope he loses the next election, that was illegal because that was taking a position on electoral politics. So it gets very tricky. I can tell you as general counsel, monitoring that kind of stuff is very complicated.
So we have a couple of minutes left, but I gotta ask you what I think is an important question. You say radio is kind of like a dying breed, and it's technology, it's YouTube and stuff. So do you see a future for radio?
Well, I say it's dying in some respects. Uh, I I think that I listen to the radio uh, only when I'm in the car. Otherwise, I don't listen to the radio.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I do listen to podcasts, or I will sometimes put on WBI.org on my computer to hear what's coming on. But I know that there is a massive audience for talk radio, and people probably have learned to listen to it on their computers, if not on their radios, or they have. I don't even know if you can buy a radio anymore outside of your car, uh, and and I know that young people. I have teenagers. I own two teenagers. Uh, if I say radio, they don't even know what I'm talking about. Everything they listen to is on YouTube. But I do think that there will continue to be an audience. There is enough of an audience that commercial radio stations, like I said, someone offered $50 million for WBI signature signal only a year ago. So if we get offers like that, there must be a lot of people listening.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's going to continue to be an audience for it. But people like you and me also and Pacifica need to also get themselves in onto other mediums, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's Sirius XM, whether it's YouTube, whether it's TikTok, which is expanding its program base, because now TikToks aren't all 30 seconds or however they are. They have TikTok shows now. And because that's where the next generations are listening to. And I think that's the way we will survive, by we can survive as a radio station, but I think if we want to get out to a broader audience, we also need to follow the developments in social media.
So we're just about out of time. You've been listening to Arthur Schwartz, and he is on WBAI. I believe it's Saturdays, right?
So now I'm on Thursdays at 7 p.m.
Okay. So if you do it on Zoom and put it on YouTube, then people could hear it and see it anytime, right?
Well, it is on, if you go to WBI.org, uh, and we do save it as a podcast.
Okay.
So if people have to go to WBI.org and you look, my show is called Advocating for Justice,
Mm-hmm.
and you can listen to shows going back for several years. Um,
Okay.
I wish I could find the one where I interviewed AOC a year before she won. But our shows are all available on the station. But one of the things they need to do is better package that stuff so it's easier to find.
Okay.
But it is available. Anybody who wants to hear, hear my show can go to wbai.org and look for advocating. There's a link that says listen on demand, and then you click that link, and then it has advocating. You can write in advocating for justice and then pick out any show you want.
Thank you, Arthur. You've been listening to Arthur Schwartz. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks, Arthur. You've been very informative.